Thank you. The next item of business is a statement by Fiona Hislop on A96 corridor review publication. The Cabinet Secretary will take questions at the end of her statement, and therefore there should be no interventions or interruptions. And I call on Cabinet Secretary Fiona Hislop. Up to 10 minutes, please.
Presiding Officer, I would like to begin my statement today by expressing my sincerest sympathies to the families of anyone who has been killed or injured on our roads. In particular, my thoughts are with the family and friends of those involved in recent incidents, including the fatal accident on the A96 east of Brodie on the 11th of November. Road safety remains of paramount importance to this government, and this is reflected in our ambition to have 0 deaths or serious injuries on our roads by 2050, with an interim target to halve the number of people killed or seriously injured on the road by 2030. Presiding Officer, this government is also wholeheartedly committed to improving transport infrastructure in the north and the north east of Scotland, including the A96 corridor. In recent years, we have invested almost £1 billion, delivering many improvements to the strategic road network in this area, including the Aberdeen Western Peripheral Route, the A92-A96 Hoddigan improvement, the A96 Fochabers and Mostodlock bypass, and the A96 Inveramsey Bridge, amongst others. In addition to this, the £3.7 billion A9 dualling programme is moving forward, with the construction contract for the Tomatin to Moy section awarded in July this year. The procurement competition for the Tay crossing to Ballynewig is also continuing, with contract awards scheduled for summer 2025. Members will be aware that the Butte House Agreement required that an A96 corridor review be conducted. Although that agreement has ended, MSPs of all parties have continued to call for it still to be published, and today I am fulfilling an obligation to publish the full A96 corridor review for consideration by MSPs and the public. The corridor review includes extensive and detailed appraisal and assessment work which has been undertaken by Transport Scotland. The extensive review reporting consists of over 2,000 pages, and as such it is my intention to invite interested MSPs to a roundtable briefing session with me and Transport Scotland officials. I consider it appropriate to provide the public and other stakeholders with ample opportunity to fully consider the findings from the detailed work undertaken by Transport Scotland before providing their feedback. I note that the review itself contains information on full dualling. The review will therefore be subject to a 12-week consultation on its contents. The Scottish Government's current plan is to fully dual the A96 between Inverness and Aberdeen, and as part of this process, Transport Scotland has been undertaking a transparent, evidence-based review of the programme.
Cabinet Secretary, please resume your seat. A point of order, Douglas Ross.
I'm sorry, Presiding Officer, and I wouldn't normally do this, but can you say if it's in order for the Transport Secretary to deliberately mislead this Parliament? Because anyone who has read this document knows that this SNP government are no longer committed to fully dualling the A96, and whatever the Cabinet Secretary is saying today, it is not the truth, because this document says they are backsliding on their commitment and they are not going to fully dual that road.
I would say to Mr Ross that's not, strictly speaking, a point of order. The Cabinet Secretary is in the middle of making her statement, and after she... Mr Ross, I would ask you to withdraw that remark.
Well, I will simply do it because I want to ask a question.
Lovely, thank you. I think we'll stop there. Cabinet Secretary, please resume, and we can listen to the Cabinet Secretary, and then members will have the opportunity to put their questions to the Cabinet Secretary. Cabinet Secretary.
The A96 corridor review has been undertaken in accordance with the Scottish Transport Appraisal Guidance, which is the best practice, objective-led approach to transport appraisal. The review has considered the transport problems and opportunities along the A96 corridor, changing policy context, including a focus on making better use of existing assets and the response to climate change, along with other relevant considerations such as aspirations for development. In addition, the review has included a climate compatibility assessment along with other statutory assessments. Appropriate, effective stakeholder and public engagement has been undertaken by Transport Scotland at key stages during the review process. Given the effects of the climate emergency and COVID-19 on travel, the views of residents, stakeholders and businesses have been vital to help the analysis and to understand any impacts and associated changes to travel patterns along the corridor. The problems and opportunities identified through the initial consultation in 2022 have been instrumental in developing the review's appraisal and assessment criteria and ensures that vital public feedback has been appropriately considered throughout this process. Members will recall that the initial 4-week public consultation undertaken as a key element of the review generated unprecedented interest, with almost 4,700 responses received and over 11,000 suggested options. Given the sheer volume of responses received and the high number of options this generated, it was only right to carefully examine the extensive feedback from members of the public we serve and all the options generated as part of this initial appraisal exercise. The initial appraisal rationalised the multitude of options generated, retaining 16 options for preliminary appraisal. This key stage then considered these options and rejected those that were found to perform poorly against the review's appraisal criteria. 14 remaining options, which included full dualling, progressed to the detailed appraisal stage. The appraisal work undertaken recognised that the identified problems and opportunities along the corridor would be best addressed through use of an area-based or geographical approach. This allowed the development of a range of packages that would address common problems and opportunities across similar locations throughout the A96 corridor to be appraised in detail. Transport Scotland has now concluded this detailed appraisal stage and has considered the relative performance of 7 packages of improvements for the corridor, including full dualling of the A96. Presiding Officer, this detailed appraisal of all the evidence identifies that there is an optimal refined package. This refined package includes a spread of interventions across all modes of transport, supporting a multimodal approach to transport investment within the corridor. The package includes bypasses of Elgin and Keith and targeted road safety improvements, an A96 electric corridor to improve alternative refuelling facilities, rail improvements to reduce passenger journey times and enhance freight facilities, improvements in towns and villages to encourage more people to walk and cycle locally, investment in flexible transport opportunities to improve connectivity in areas with limited access to existing public transport, and improvements to public transport interchange facilities. The refined package cost estimate is in the range of £501 million to £1 billion at 2022 prices, which compares with a range of £2.5 billion to £5 billion for dualling the A96 from east of Nairn to Aberdeen. It is clear that it will not be possible to dual all of the A96 by 2030. Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government currently favours fully dualling the A96 between Inverness and Aberdeen. The A96 corridor review evidence suggests that there may be a different approach to provide alternative solutions at a more cost-effective, affordable budget. It is
please resume. I will not have a running commentary. I made it quite clear at the beginning that the statement would be made without interventions or interruptions, and I expect that my instruction in that regard will be heeded. Cabinet Secretary, please resume.
It is important that we gather the public's views before making a final decision on the programme, so today we are also launching a 12-week consultation on outcomes from the review. This will provide people, businesses and organisations with the opportunity to fully consider the findings from the detailed work that has been undertaken by Transport Scotland, a requirement, as I have made clear, was part of the Butte House Agreement, and a review anticipated and expected by MSPs, and provide vital feedback. The review published today extends to over 2,000 pages of reporting and clearly demonstrates the significant work which has been undertaken to inform future investment in this key transport corridor. Importantly, the material now available on Transport Scotland's website also clearly sets out the performance of the refined package alongside that of the current plan to fully dual the route. This will enable all interested parties to consider, compare and be fully informed of the respective performance of potential improvements to the A96 corridor, including full dualling, before sharing their views. I appreciate that this is a huge amount of information for everyone, including elected members, to digest, and that is why I will hold a further roundtable meeting with interested MSPs during the consultation period to give them appropriate time to review and fully consider the material, ask questions and give their views. Presiding Officer, I also want to update Parliament on the A96 dualling Inverness to Nairn, including Nairn bypass scheme, which is separate from the A96 corridor review process, as it has already received ministerial approval. Completion of the statutory process for this A96 dualling scheme earlier this year clears the way for ministers to take forward the final stage of the process to acquire the land required to construct the dualling scheme. Transport Scotland is now pressing ahead with the procedural steps to make this happen in the coming months. Work has also commenced to determine the most suitable procurement option for delivering the A96 Inverness to Nairn, including Nairn bypass dualling scheme, and thereafter a timetable for progress can be set in line with available budgets. Today, Presiding Officer, this Government is reiterating its commitment to the people of the North and North East of Scotland. The position of this Government has not changed. The current favoured position is to fully dual the A96, and we are already starting the dualling process from Inverness to Nairn, including Nairn bypass. The outcomes from the review undertaken by Transport Scotland have been published today in draft for public consultation, and no final decision has been made. Feedback from people and stakeholders will inform the Scottish Government's final decision on how best to take forward improvements to the A96, while also balancing the demands of the challenging economic climate, current policy and the climate emergency. That feedback will also assist in planning how improvements along the corridor are prioritised and inform our timescales going forward for the wider A96, following on from the major and ongoing roads and wider investment in the north and the north east of Scotland. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. The Cabinet Secretary will now take questions on the issues raised in her statement. I intend to allow around 20 minutes, after which time we will move on to the next item of business. It would be helpful if those members who wish to seek to ask a question were to press the request to speak buttons now. And I call Sue Webber.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Let me first say thank you to the Cabinet Secretary for advance sight of the statement. And can I first pay tribute also to the hundreds of people who have been injured and lost their lives on the A96, and also to the emergency workers who are left picking up the pieces. Communities who use the A96 will feel rightly betrayed by the Cabinet Secretary's response today. The SNP are once again kicking a decision on the A96 further down the road, despite committing to dualling it in 2011, 15 years ago. In the general election campaign, and less than 3 hours ago, the First Minister said that he was committed to dualling the A96. However, instead of fulfilling their promise to communities on the A96, the Cabinet Secretary is betraying them. The Cabinet Secretary admits in her statement that the SNP government will break its promise and that the A96 will not be dualled by 2030. Worse still, the door is being left open to rowing back on that promise entirely. That would be unacceptable to communities who rely on this road. Will the Cabinet Secretary jettison this so-called refined approach and finally keep the SNP's promise to dual the A96 between Aberdeen and Inverness?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I think I also should point out that with agreement of Parliament and the Presiding Officer, we were able to provide a GIQ earlier this morning. I recognise that's not enough time for everyone to look at the 2,000 pages, but it was an attempt to respond to requests to have more time for consideration. In terms of my statement today, I have made it quite clear. I think it is obvious, particularly if we look at the financial pressures that the Scottish Government is under, that meeting that target by 2030 is not possible. 2011 was a different time. I do remember the financial crash and the Gordon Brown first budget and then subsequent Conservative Government budgets. At that time, I don't think anyone would have anticipated the capital collapse that subsequently happened in terms of our financial provision for a whole variety of reasons, which I don't necessarily need to relay today. And that has, I think, caused immense issues. However, I can say that we are commencing the dualling of the A96 with the Inverness to Nairn, including Nairn bypass, and also the Inches to Smithton provision. That is our commitment in terms of that issue. In terms of jettisoning something that has barely been published only a few hours ago, it was a commitment made by this Parliament. MSPs from all parties had asked for it to be published, including from the Conservatives. That's what we've done, and there is now a 12-week period that people can have a look at the content of that detail and to provide feedback.
I call Michael Mara.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I can thank the Cabinet Secretary for advance sight of the statement. I begin by associating myself and my party with the remarks regarding the loss of life on on the road, on the A96, particularly the most recent tragic events. It's now 13 years since SNP promised to dual the A96. In that time, we've had 3 Transport Secretaries, 3 First Ministers, but today we find out there is no chance of that promise being fulfilled over fully of the course of 2 decades. And this is just another symptom of what is an incompetent government that has broken countless promises and has long since run out of steam. Is the Cabinet Secretary really satisfied with the pace of this project? I note that many of the technicalities that she describes involved, but I would like to hear some contrition on behalf of those constituents today. Will she offer that apology for these interminable delays?
Cabinet Secretary.
So we asked if I'm satisfied. Of course I'm not satisfied, but I'm also not so satisfied with the impact of successive capital restrictions on our budget. I'm also dissatisfied that some of the decisions that this government, when it came into power in 2007, had to make, for example, his party and others insisting that we've invested in the Edinburgh Tram project rather than the A9. I'm also concerned about the consequences of Brexit, a Brexit that's still supported by the Labour Party now. These issues have all had consequences on the capital provision of this government. Despite that fact, we have made major capital infrastructure investments, many of them in the north east of Scotland. And the Aberdeen peripheral route was something that this SNP government delivered. It was thought of, planned of, people thought, and it might have been done before. It never was. It took the SNP government to come into power to deliver on that. So despite all those pressures, we've managed to do infrastructure investments. Some of that is not at the pace I would have wanted, but I think any reasonable person looking at the pressures, looking at the experience of the last 10 years, would understand that what was reasonable in 2011 as a timeline is not reasonable in terms of deliverability now, and certainly not when we look at the budget position that the Scottish Government currently finds itself in.
I call Emma Roddick to be followed by Liam Kerr. Ms Roddick.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome the recommitment from the Cabinet Secretary today to the full dualling of the A96 between Inverness and Aberdeen. It is a vital project for so many reasons, not least road safety and rural connectivity. The Nairn bypass in particular has the potential to alleviate many issues, including reducing congestion and pollution in the town and opening up potential for active travel. So can the Cabinet Secretary speak to this part of the programme in particular, and is she willing to commit to bringing the construction of the bypass forward to as soon as possible within the overall timescales?
Cabinet Secretary.
So there's a number of elements, particularly around the A96 Inverness to Nairn bypass. I'm acutely aware of the requests of the people of Nairn. I attended a public meeting organised by the local paper in terms of their campaign. It was clear to me from that experience that people did want to see the Nairn bypass completed first. Now, that has consequences, probably both in time and also in cost. But I recognise that if you're looking at the road that obviously quite clearly cuts through the town, causes enormous delays, and for those that work there, and also including schools that I heard of the experience of Rosebank Primary School, for example, you can see the requirements to identify, and I've asked officials to look at whether that would be possible and how that would impact on timetable. The other aspect of that section of the dualling programme is looking at the type of procurement that will determine the timetable and whether we combine different contracts to make a larger one for one sort of procurement, or whether we split up the scheme and have separate smaller contracts, and that's possibly what we would have to do for the Nairn bypass, but that also has consequences. So I will obviously keep Parliament informed of the decisions on that as that part of the A96 dualling progresses.
I call Liam Kerr to be followed by Fergus Ewing. Mr Kerr.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. 128 people have been killed or injured on this killer road since 2021. The review acknowledges that the full dualling promised 13 years and 16 transport ministers ago would provide greater accident reductions, which stands to reason when Transport Scotland figures show the risk of a fatal or serious collision is 432% higher on single carriageways. However, full dualling is being abandoned because it goes on. It would have a much greater negative impact on visual amenity. Is the Cabinet Secretary content to let the carnage continue for the sake of aesthetics and abject ignorance of the needs of the North East?
Cabinet Secretary.
I don't actually think that question does credit to the member, who I know takes these issues very seriously. And if he actually has time, and that's why I think we do need to have time to study the 2,000 pages, he's obviously looked at the summary report. I think it's quite clear from the summary report, if you're looking at the safety measure, that is where the merits of the full dualling has precedent. There are other measures that are in there. That's part of that stag appraisal. That's the normal objective way that we look at these things. But in terms of the number of deaths, I know that in particularly since 2019, there has been a total of 17. We do know that there are deaths happen, unfortunately, on many roads. And I am particularly concerned about how we can have improvements that can take place meantime on a whole load of different roads, including on junctions in different areas. But he knows from the answers I've given to him before that there are many factors that are involved generally in accidents, and obviously the police statistics and investigations bring them about. But I recognise it's why we're obviously looking at and delivering, and you can start seeing the works taking place in Tomatin Tamoy and the A9, that we are progressing those drilling projects with available funding. And that is why I think it's important that we give this due consideration, but recognise what the benefits of dualling are compared to other benefits, and actually give our constituents, or your constituents, Presiding Officer, the members' constituents, the opportunity to feed back on that during that 12-week process.
I call Fergus Ewing to be followed by Jackie Dunbar. Mr Ewing.
Presiding Officer, this statement has already been met with white fury from my constituents, including long-standing SNP members who are aware that this pledge is 3 decades old. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary, does she agree that this report is flawed? It started off with a foregone conclusion. So far as I can see, the strategic business case doesn't even consider, and I couldn't see a reference to the renewables opportunities in the North East and the Highlands over the next century, when we require safe, decent roads to the same standard as the Central Belt. Now, 7-to-1 people in the Jacobs analysis of 22 said, who responded of the 4,800 people, said they wanted a dual carriageway. 7-to-1. How many more consultations do we need before we accept the voice and the verdict of the people in the north of Scotland? And if we don't, how can, Cabinet Secretary, in all good faith, this be considered anything other than a presage to total betrayal?
Cabinet Secretary.
So in terms of the report, I made it clear that I had an obligation to carry through the request of other MSPs of all parties to publish what was commissioned as part of the Butte House Agreement with the Green Party. That has now been produced. Some people thought it would be just simply a climate change comparator. It has gone through the required appraisal. We combined 2 sets of the appraisals to ensure that we could move forward at pace, and that includes the first one that he referred to, and the 2022, and then obviously the carrying on of that consideration. I do think that looking at the renewables industry and what is required is important. It's why I've also commissioned advice, and particularly in relation to Ardeshir, what that might mean. Only this morning I had a meeting with SSEN discussing these very issues of how our transport infrastructure can support the growth in that renewable sector. So these are very important points, but I have an obligation of transparency to come to this Parliament to publish what was required as part of that A96 corridor review, and that is what I've done today.
I call I call Jackie Dunbar to be followed by Rhoda Grant. Jackie Dunbar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm not sure if opposition members have short memories or just selective amnesia. The SNP has reconnected Kintore and Lawrence Kirk to the railway. The Aberdeen bypass, spoken about for 50 years, delivered. The Hadigan improvement in my constituency of Aberdeen Donside, now named the Brian Adam Road, delivered. My party has delivered for the North East before and will continue to do so in the future. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary, given their enormous interest in the subject, how members of the public can make their views known and how will they be kept aware of opportunities to raise their views?
Cabinet Secretary.
So the member makes an important point about the investment that this party has and this party in government has delivered in relation to the north and the north east of Scotland. If I look at the expense and the priorities in my budget, they are in the Highlands and Islands and the north of Scotland primarily. And I think members will know that there are MSPs of all parties wanting to investment in their part of Scotland. But I recognise that the initial focus in my term as Transport Secretary has been in those particular areas of Scotland. So I recognise what the member says. In terms of that engagement, the Transport Scotland's website has found ways of developing a system by which people can provide their feedback, also particularly view what is a complex area in terms of information to be downloaded and to be assessed. So the point of that engagement is absolute. I would encourage members, whatever their views on this, to ensure that the constituents are made aware of the publication of this report, which includes full dualling of the A96, and to provide their feedback in what has been set out in that commissioned corridor review, which was part of that agreement that was made some time ago.
I call Rhoda Grant to be followed by Mark Ruskell. Ms Grant's joining us remotely.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Inverness is the only city in Scotland not to be joined to the rest of Scotland by dual carriageway, and that's unacceptable. She also knows that the people of Nairn have been crying out for their bypass for decades, with the town totally gridlocked at peak times. These promises to them have been broken. So the people in Nairn need to understand today when they can expect their bypass and dual carriageway to Inverness to be built. If the Cabinet Secretary delays providing that time frame until the capital plan is published, they'll have to wait a whole year for an update, and that's simply not acceptable.
Cabinet Secretary.
So, in terms of the decisions around what happens with Inverness and Nairn, not only was I keen to make sure that we completed the statutory requirements on Inverness to Nairn, including Nairn bypass dualling, but also inches to Smithton. She makes the point in terms of that dualling aspect, and that's why that aspect of the dualling is also being commenced. That enables the Transport Scotland now to purchase the land that's required to enable the work to be carried out. Also, as part of our work on Inverness to Nairn, consideration has to be given to the feasibility and attractiveness of combining with adjacent schemes to form larger contracts, or splitting the scheme and delivering through smaller contracts, for example, the Nairn bypass. We also have to consider, as was set out at the public meeting that I attended in Nairn, whether we proceed on a design and build method, or do we use a mutual investment model. The member will also know that we're examining, and we have already started that process of examining the opportunities of a mutual investment model for parts of the A9. Can I reassure her we're doing in parallel that same exercise for the Inverness to Nairn bypass, and it's on completion that we can provide a reliable timetable. To do so in advance of that would be speculation, because as I said as my official said at the Nairn public meeting, the timetable will depend on whether it's design and build through capital or whether it's funded through the mutual investment model.
I call Mark Ruskell to be followed by Beatrice Wishart. Mr Ruskell.
Thank you. Can I warmly welcome this statement and the review? It is evidence-based, particularly on the issue of road safety, and it has had the input of communities as well. But it's quite clear to the conclusions of this review that spending upwards of £5,000 million on full dualling would be a waste of money, and that the preferred package that's been put forward of bypasses at Elgin and Keith, road safety improvements, investment in rail and public transport, all deliverable for 1/5 of the cost of full dualling, is the right way forward. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary, when will the Scottish Government be able to accelerate the investment in that preferred package and actually deliver for communities and actually deliver the road safety improvements that are needed to save lives?
Cabinet Secretary.
So I understand Mark Ruskell would welcome the review. It was part of the Butte House agreement requested by the Green Party in particular. That has now been delivered as was requested. It sets out a whole range of different provisions in what has been called the refined package. I want to hear, not just from MSPs, but from the public, what their views on that. And following the determination of that, it would be able to allow us to have that assessment of the way forward. Our view is that we want to fully dual the A96. We have got the constraints of budget, and therefore I think it's reasonable to look at the timescale, know and acknowledge that it won't be delivered by 2030, but all of these factors have to be put into place in order for government to look forward and to plan for investments for the future. I call Beatrice Wishart, who's joining us remotely, to be followed by Audrey Nicholl. Ms Wishart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I'd like to associate myself with what's been said about those who have sadly lost their lives on the A96. While the Cabinet Secretary reaffirms the Scottish Government's position is still in favour of full dualling on the A96 route, many in the North East and across and along the route will have serious concerns today that full dualling will not go ahead after publication of the review. We want to ensure that the voices of the communities along the corridor are listened to. The A96 currently runs through the town centres of Elgin and Keith, and the Northern Scot found that the Forest to Elgin section of the A96 is the most dangerous section of the road. Those in Elgin and Keith are keen that bypasses are built to improve safety for all road users. Can the Cabinet Secretary give a guarantee today that the Elgin and Keith bypasses will go ahead?
Cabinet Secretary. So I thank the member for her question. I think she really cuts to the issue about priorities within the works that will be undertaken to improve the A96. And I think the point about the Elgin and Keith bypasses are very well made indeed. And I think she also makes the point about which parts of the road need their improvements and indeed the work delivered first. But as we've identified, there are 7 packages been identified. Some of them are roads, some of the rails, some of the other areas in the preferred route. But whatever happens in regards to improvements on the A96, the bypassing of Elgin and Keith are clearly, in my view, although I have to wait obviously to hear what people say, but I'd be very surprised if that did not come back from the consultation as a priority for constituents across that corridor. I call Audrey Nicholl to be followed by Douglas Ross. Ms Nicholl.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As members have already referenced, road safety is of paramount importance. The Scottish Government is required to be cognisant of the challenging economic climate in which it's currently operating and of the climate emergency, which is an existential one. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary how the Government intends to balance these different facets when taking this piece of work forward?
Cabinet Secretary. In terms of how Transport Scotland, as the Scottish Government's agency, assesses aspects of any transport infrastructure for investment, it does require that the different stages of the stag appraisal to take place. That combines those issues around climate compatibility and also in terms of safety. There are different ways that we can secure safety. Dualling can be one route, but there are other routes, as we know, that also have to be provided for, and that's what we will intend to do as part of our ongoing road safety priority work that I'm undertaking, along with COSLA, along with local authorities, along with our transport officers and along, importantly, with Police Scotland. I call Douglas Ross to be followed by Rona Mackay. Mr Ross.
2 years late, at a cost of millions of pounds, this A96 corridor review is an absolute sham and a disgrace. And isn't it telling that the only parties welcoming it today are the SNP and the Greens, whose votes they need in this place? But also a disgrace has been the Cabinet Secretary's statement and this entire SNP government. Because make no mistake, it is as clear as day from this review that they are no longer committed to dualling the A96 in full. And that is the ultimate betrayal of my constituents in Murray, the Highlands and the North East, who were promised time and time again that this road would be a priority, and it clearly isn't. I haven't believed a word the Cabinet Secretary has said today, so if she's going to convince me that the SNP will fully dual the A96 in full, can she tell the Chamber when?
Cabinet Secretary. So Douglas Ross may not have been able to adjust which Parliament he may want to be in, but if he...
Mr Ross, please listen to the Cabinet Secretary give the answer to the question. Thank you.
There is a serious point here. I've just explained that the method of procurement, whether mutual investment model, whether design and build, and indeed the priorities as whether the Elgin bypass would be done first or the Keith bypass first, all of these issues would go into a plan to determine what the timetable would be for dualling. I have been as open as I can in saying that I think we should should acknowledge that the original target of 2030 for full dualling.
Mr Ross, I've already said, Cabinet Secretary, please resume your seat for a second. I've already explained, Mr Ross, that when somebody has the floor, other people who are in their seats do not. Cabinet Secretary, please resume.
Well, I think in terms... I think there's a point about that there may be a place for barracking behaviour in some parliaments.
Cabinet Secretary, I will deal with Cabinet Secretary. Please, I'm in the chair and I'll deal with that. We're running out of time here, and there's 2 more members I want to have the opportunity to ask their questions. Please just respond to the point, and I can call the next speaker. Thank you.
I will inform the Parliament of the outcome of the 12-week consultation.
Thank you. And I call, I've got 2 more speakers. I would like to take both. I would need some cooperation to have succinct questions and succinct answers. I call Rona Mackay to be followed by Edward Mountain. Ms Mackay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary how the acute fiscal challenges the Scottish Government is contending with, bequeathed to the North East and the rest of the country by the Tories, will impact upon important capital infrastructure projects like improving the safety of the A96?
Cabinet Secretary.
I think any reasonable person looking at the economic and financial situation that the UK finds itself in and continues to find itself in because of some circumstances that were self-inflicted, for example Brexit, some that obviously were the subject to consequences of the cost of living and other issues, and also the impact of cost inflation, particularly on construction, also means that not only is there a limit to the amount of capital availability for any major investment project, when you embark on that investment project, the cost of it can also be rising. One of the issues that we have to contend with in the good news of the renewable sector growing in Scotland, that the construction demand and also the skills demand for that will also put pressure on all construction projects, and indeed the value for money that we can get from that. That's the realistic position that we're in. But I've given my commitment to the improvements to the A96. We're already delivering the additional dualling that is on the A9, and I have also set out that the A96 dualling from Inverness to Nairn is commencing, and we are progressing that process, and I will keep Parliament informed of that.
And I call Edward Mountain.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Now, the First Minister at First Minister's Questions today gave a cast-iron guarantee of dualling the A9 and the A96, but this Cabinet Secretary only currently favours it. Will she go along with her First Minister in the hope that, I ask this in the hope that Highlanders will get what's been promised for many, many years? Will you give us a cast-iron guarantee as your boss did?
Always through the Chair. Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, clearly in terms of the programme that I have been supportive of as Minister and then as Cabinet Secretary in delivering the A9, people can see the evidence of that. The important part of that was ensuring the finances of that were planned for and managed to be set out as baked-in aspects of our budgets. The challenge we have, particularly for the A96, is the quantum. Again, we're talking between £2.5 billion and £5 billion in terms of full dualling. That will have challenges, not least in the timetable of what can be delivered and when. But in terms of the A96 dualling, we are delivering on that, the Inverness to Nairn bypass. I think that's an important start in what we can do. But it would be remiss of me not to publish a report which was asked for as part of that original Butte House agreement, demanded by a number of members of the Parliament, including from Conservatives, wanted to see this review. If they wanted to see the review just to dismiss it within hours of it being published, I don't think they're giving service to their constituents. So please ensure that they're engaged in that 12-week consultation.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. That concludes the statement, and there will be a short pause before we move on to the next item of business to allow frontbench teams to change position, should they so wish. Thank you.